Well, I woke up this morning, Kennedy, and I saw this weird looking portrait. King of England, King Charles. Looks like a mess. It's got, I don't know, this blood or fire, Hades, hell. What's going on here? How you doing, Kennedy?
Good. I didn't have any nightmares last night, but I'm going to have them now.
Oh, I got a feedback loop. Yeah, and also I don't know if you just saw right before we went live, Kennedy, the Prime Minister of Slovakia was shot. Have you seen that?
I did not see that.
Yeah, it's a headline here. Let me see if I can pull it up. He, I saw that Viktor Orban of Hungary made a statement about it, and nope. It's got a big ad on it. That's
It's
what it is.
behind that.
There we go. Slovakia's Prime Minister Fico in life-threatening condition after being shot multiple times. You can see him putting him into the car. It's kind of scary. And from what I can put together on this, he was sort of the swing back to the right prime minister. They had a lot of lockdowns during a certain medical crisis in Europe. A couple
You can
of years
talk about
back.
it on YouTube now.
I don't think you can. I still don't think you can.
Okay.
You think you can talk about that on
Well, I know you can,
what?
and I know you can, and here's why. I did an interview with a priest during 2022, just around the trucker convoy time, and I didn't even air it, but I put it up on the back end, and he said so many insane things that it was taken down, and I got a warning on my channel for medical and misinformation. So then that warning was there for like 2 years.
Yeah.
Not a strike, but a warning. And then they made me do this, like, to get rid of the warning, do the training thing.
Mm.
And I did the training thing. And according to YouTube, you are allowed to talk about side effects, policies, but you just have to say, like, this is what's reported. Or
yeah. See, I just don't want it. I don't even want to play that. That's too tightrope. Too tightrope. So let's get back to King Charles. Anyway, here is the unveiling of this. They say it's art, but this is it right here. Here he is. He pulls the thread.
Yeah, I don't get it.
So Father Calvin Robinson says, "I've seen Ghostbusters. I know who this ends." I said, "Dorian Gray or Ghostbusters? Which one is it?" Do you know the reference here to the Ghostbusters? Do you know what they're talking about?
Is it the first movie?
Yeah, the original. So there was this painting here. I'll put it up on the show for us. There's this painting. Whoa, that's big. It's the gatekeeper and the keymaster, and there was this painting. Do you see this painting? This ringing a bell? And then he kind of comes alive out of this satanic occultic world and is I can't remember what his name was, but ever. He comes out of the painting. And so people are comparing it to this sort of occult, dark thing. And here's kind of why I wanted to bring it up at the beginning, because we're going to talk about today also the mass burial thing in Canada and how that's unraveling. But it seems to me that when it comes to monarchy, if you aren't a king who is clearly in love with the church and the faith and the people, the de facto knee-jerk response from people is, you're a Satanist, pedophile, horrible, evil person. And I don't know, you're a Canadian, so don't you guys like submit to this guy or something?
We are British subjects. God save the Queen, or God save the King. Yeah, we're supposed to say that.
You're supposed to say that. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think? What's going on with this?
Well, I mean, I think all of our governments suck. And I think I saw something, that guy Zuby on Twitter.
Yeah,
I think
I met him. I met him when he came to Dallas once. Interesting
He's
guy.
a nice guy.
He is a nice
Seems like
guy.
a nice guy. And he said something on Twitter like, if they just did a random selection of law-abiding citizens and made them president, it might have a better track record of the actual presidents. The monarchy is definitely flawed. We're not like, I mean, we don't, the king doesn't do anything in Canada. It's symbolic. I mean, he's on our money. The Speaker of the House sits on the throne, which is representative of the monarchy, and he okays the bills and things like that. But it's been, I think the last time the British monarchy intervened in Canadian politics was like 70 years ago. Like it was somewhere around World War II. I don't even think they have that veto power anymore. It's really just symbolic. I'm not really sure. But it's funny, the other day in Parliament, it was a couple weeks ago, there was a motion put forth to make Canada a republic and stop the allegiance to the monarchy. And it was an overwhelming majority, even of the Liberals, who said, no, we want to stay under the monarchy. It was basically just the Quebec Separatist Party that wanted to get rid of it. So, yeah, I don't know. It's still part of our
To
stuff.
me, that's so odd. I mean, I'm an American, but
yeah,
it just seems so odd. You know, I got in trouble, Kennedy, when King Charles became king after his mother passed away. I made a video that King Charles is an antichrist, not the antichrist, but he's an antichrist because he is, of course, a globalist and a modernist and an Anglican, but he's also the head of a false church, the Church of England. He's the head of a false church, and that makes him an antichrist. Did I go too far on that? A lot of people got ticked that I said that.
Well, I mean, all of these false leaders all of these leaders who adhere to false religions in some way have characteristics of the Antichrist. I mean, in the sense that Stalin had characteristics and Hitler had characteristics, and the history of the Anglican persecution of the Catholics is extremely vile. I mean, it's, I was talking to somebody last night, actually, at our Holy Name meeting, and he was reading the martyrology of the English martyrs, and he said it's not something you want to read before bed.
Yeah.
Because you'll just have nightmares. So, definitely there are massive issues. So he has characteristics. I mean, definitely, the English monarchy, especially since the last probably 100 years, has definitely aligned itself with a lot of these globalist powers. But the funny thing is, I've got this book I'm staring at on my desk right now. It's a biography of St. Edmund Campion. And, he died while he was being executed and so forth. He said, I'm a loyal subject in the civil sense of the Queen, but I'm a child of Rome, a son of Rome. And there's always been this kind of dichotomy for Anglo-Catholics. So, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a both and.
Yeah. But do you think I went too far calling him an antichrist? I mean, here's his we have holy cards in Catholic. Here's his unholy card, right? If you're going to make an unholy card, here it is. By being the head of a false religion, is he antichrist? An antichrist, not the antichrist.
I mean, in the small a sense of any false leader pushing a secularist regime that is in contravention to the one true church, and Freudian slip. England is instrumental in setting up the state of Israel, which is obviously at the heart of this whole conflict in the temple and all these kinds of things. So there's definitely aspects there where I think the argument could be made. But I think it's hard for a lot of loyalist ears to hear, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's what's surprising to me is even within, I think some of the pushback that I got was from traditional circles in the United Kingdom. And they're like, you SOB, you can't talk about our king that way. God save the king. And I'm like, well, he is a heretic. I'm like, well, we know he's a heretic, right? But we still want to commemorate him all the time, which I get. All right. Like I'm not proud of everything in America. We have a lot of bad stuff in our history and things that I disagree with. So I understand that you can salute the flag without all the sins, but I don't know. If you read The Time of Edmund Campion, and are you reading Evelyn Waugh's book or a different one?
I finished it. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Everyone read. Here's your homework this week on the Dr. Taylor Marshall podcast. Get a copy of Evelyn Waugh's book, Edmund Campion. There it is.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. You read that in the English during that time period. This is under Queen Elizabeth the First.
Mm-hmm.
They want England to be Catholic again. They want England to be Catholic again.
Yep.
It seems now, almost 500 years later, that there's sort of this resolve that we'll never be a Catholic nation again.
You know, it's kind of like the dichotomy in the scriptures where St. Paul talks about the emperor being the diakonos of the death penalty.
Right.
You know, like, I mean, these emperors, I mean, literally, church fathers were opining that perhaps some of these emperors may have been the Antichrist, like capital T, capital A. But at the same time, we find in the scriptures that there's this, I mean, all authority. This is the hard thing. This is why it's so hard to be a Catholic politically. Like me personally, I have very strong, like I'll use the L word here. I have very strong libertarian leanings. Like that's my temperament of, if the government has more than two people, like I think it's too big. You know, that's just kind of how I am. That's my personality. So like, but at the same time, this Catholic side of me, you know, I read the Distributists, the Integralists and stuff, and I have a lot of affinity for a lot of the things they say as well, because it makes a lot of sense with essentially the theology of authority, in that, you know, in the sense of it being part of the natural law and been defined in the scriptures and things. So Catholics are always a fish out of water politically, because especially in the post-revolutionary age, where in a sense all of our governments are illegitimate in the sense that they're all in rejection of Christ the King. Right. But on the other hand, we have to obey them insofar as they command things that are legitimate.
Yeah,
there I am.
Okay, so just to, you know, you went back, you talked about St. Paul and Romans and honoring the emperor, honoring the king. And that is Christian. That goes back. Even Joseph and Mary obey Caesar and go to Bethlehem for the census. So that's all in there. But those were pagan kings who had not been evangelized. This King Charles is a man whose nation has been evangelized, has submitted to Rome, has submitted to the cross of Jesus Christ, and then spun into a heresy, and not just into a heresy, but part of their heresy is the monarch is the gubernator, the governor and the head of the church. So in a way, that's more diabolical than even Nero. Am I out of line here?
No, I mean that's an argument that can be made for sure. I mean, so I think especially because I do have this sort of affinity for the Anglo culture coming from where I come from, that, you know, if you look in the back of the missals of missals that are put out by Angelus Press for like the Commonwealth, you'll find this prayer for the king, or the mass is said for the king in the back, because you know the interesting thing about the English monarchy is I was talking to some traditional Catholics in England. I'm actually going to be in London in a couple weeks. For any of you in the UK who want to be at a Chesterton conference, you can check out that. It's anyway, check out my YouTube channel, and the links are all there for the sign up and whatever. And you know, they were talking about how the funny thing is that these guys, a lot of them have lived in France as well, and in France, the Catholic churches are in a state of disrepair in a lot of places. But in England, even though they have this anti-Catholic thing, they still have this massive love of history. So they, you know, all of these old cathedrals that were taken by the Anglicans, even though no one attends them anymore, they're in pristine condition and they're like still completely beautiful. So it's like this, it's almost like this hope that you could so easily retrofit England to be Catholic again. Because it's like they just switched the names on the plaque, you know, but all the buildings and stuff are still there. So it really is this dichotomy between being under a heretic who's a usurper, but at the same time, he's preserved the infrastructure that your ancestors built. So it's a tough thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I wanted to get your take before we move on to the mass grave controversy in Canada. And I'm going to take Charles's Oh, another interesting thing about this portrait is there's a close up on, there's a butterfly on there, and then there's
Yeah.
also an eyeball, like a Gnostic eye in the painting. But I don't want to spend too much more time on that. So here's a tweet or something I retweeted, and it got over 250,000 responses on it. And I want to read it, and I wanted to get your take on this, Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
So this is I, 23 male, got a girl, 22 female, pregnant, and she wants to keep it. My life is effed, he says. I'm not ready mentally, financially, physically, or in any capacity for a kid. This girl and I aren't dating, and there are no feelings for each other. But she has some health issues that may mean she'll never be able to have a kid in the future, so she's decided to keep this one. I genuinely struggle to see the point in continuing. I will never have enough money for a home now. I will never have enough time to further my career or the things I enjoy doing. And if I choose to stay out of this kid's life, that's something I have to wrestle with morally for the rest of my own life. Not to mention the financial aspect that would still be there. Wanted to get married to someone I love and have kids way future down the line. Now I'm having a kid with someone I have no feelings at at age 23. What's your advice to this guy, Kennedy? I got some advice, but I want to hear your advice.
Well, first things first, if anyone knows this guy and you're a little bit older, you get your buddies and you get them together and you kick the crap out of them and say, smarten up, young man. I'm serious.
Is there room in society for that anymore?
Probably not.
Like, I remember so I was married in 2001, and I was a groomsman at a bunch of guys' weddings, right? And we all said it at the bachelor party and maybe even the morning of the wedding, whereas like, if you do, and we all knew their soon to be wives, like we all hung out, right? So we were all friends, and we all said, if you do wrong by this girl, we're all going to come and kick your ass. That was something that was commonly said at the bachelor party and before the wedding, because we kind of felt like if we're standing for you in the sacrament of matrimony and you go and mess it all up, like there needs to be a little bit of fraternal, not correction, but like retribution.
Yeah, I mean, listen.
Is that wrong?
This young man. No, you're right. You're completely correct. I mean, this Texas justice is better than most. So this young man suffers from, like, years ago when I was still playing rugby. I haven't played for like 5 years, but it was a men's team. So some of the guys on the team were like 19 and 20 years old. Some of us were in our 30s. And there was this young guy, and at that time we were expecting our third or fourth child. And that was crazy for people. Like, my goodness, you're having 4 kids. And this one young guy, great rugby player, nice young guy, in university, we're doing our warm-up stretches, and we were just chatting as you do during warm-up. And he was like, that's rare these days. Who can afford it? And he just kind of said it like an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is this kid showed up in like a $70,000 truck to go to practice. He's a country boy, and he came in this big truck. And I'm like, as messed up as modernity is, there's a lot of problems, obviously. Objectively speaking, this is the easiest time in history to have children in the financial sense. Like, if you just aren't an idiot and don't like spend all your money on like drugs and hookers, like, you can move to a state where there's 50 states in the United States. I'm assuming this guy's American. You could just move to a red state with low taxes and cheap property, and you can buy a 3-bedroom house for like $70,000. And like, this
I don't know about that. I don't know if you can do that.
Whatever. I'm being a little bit exaggerative, but the point is that no, this guy's financial future is not destroyed. He just has to have a little self-control. Like, he just has to get a job, work his job, and pay his bills and raise one child. Like, cry me a river, buddy.
Yeah,
There's so many things you can do. There's, even here in Canada, we have high taxes. It's not an ideal place in many ways. I have 6 kids. My wife stays home. My friends are all the same. We have a nice life and we make it work. And I'm not a millionaire. It's just, you just have to have self-control and do things the right way. So there's really no excuse for this guy to say what he's saying. It's just, Get yourself into reality and just make some decisions. You said you don't have feelings for her. Well, then how did you end up in bed with her? You had some feelings for her, so that's not even true. You just, you're just going to have to say, well, this is my bed. I'm going to lie in it. I mean, I'm assuming this guy isn't religious. So I don't know, convert to Catholicism for one. But just, it's really not that complicated. Like, what's your life goal? What, this guy doesn't seem very smart either. Like, I mean, he's 23. No. I'm assuming he's not like finishing his MBA program and about to make $200,000. So, I mean, what is his career ambitions? Like, what does he even mean by that? Is he going to be a professional video game player or something?
Right.
Like, this guy's just full of it, and he just needs a reality check.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I noticed. People who are anti-biology, anti-family, anti-procreation, they always say a kid.
Yeah.
Like, I was at the grocery store and this woman had a kid. They don't say child. I'm trying to bring back the word child, right? Not a kid. But also, this guy is very narcissistic. And I think it's fascinating that ever since the advent of the birth control pill and then free access to the A word, everyone's now like, I'm being punished because I had sexual intercourse. The world's against me. It's like, dude, if you have intercourse and she's fertile and you're fertile, the chances of a new human life springing forth into this world are rather high. Yeah. And they act like this is some like mystery, or this, the universe just came and sucker punched them. This is what happens. And again, I like you said, he's talking about his financial future's wrecked, all this stuff. It's not. Having a child is a beautiful thing. And yes, how many kids do you have now, Kennedy?
6.
All right, I got 8. It's expensive, right? But be a man. Go make some good decisions. Make some money. I always think that when these things happen, both parties should seriously consider marriage. Not saying it's always the case. Yeah. Because every single human child deserves, by natural law and natural obligation, to have a nuclear family with a mother and a father. And you may say, I don't have feelings or whatever, but that child that you procreated deserves that reality, and it should always be seriously considered. And someone's going to say, well, yeah, but now you're going to have a really destructive home life and all that. You don't know that. There's a lot of people who are lovey-dovey and they have destructive, angry home lives, and they are head over heels on the wedding day. So a lot of this has to do with free will and what you're going to make of it.
Yeah, and if I can relay a personal story. So my parents were divorced when I was very young. A dysfunctional marriage is better than a non-marriage. Like, I'll just say this, my parents being divorced, not to throw shade, I love my parents, it is what it is, but nothing is made better. Nothing is made any better by the separate homes. Obviously, there's certain cases where like the husband's abusive and the wife has to flee, and the church has talked about that. You're not divorced, but you have to live apart. Like that happens. But this is not that case. I mean, this is just a guy who has to sack up, as they say, and he has to do something about it. And moving in with each other, getting married, being there, you'll grow to love the person. Yeah, you'll grow to love the person because this is how God made it. When you have a child with someone, there's a bond, and when you link yourself together in this union that you can't break, it forces you to change your perspective on things. And the human mind is very fickle, and it can change. And you'll grow in love for each other.
And the fact of the matter is, whether he marries her or not, that woman that he slept with will be in his life for the rest of his life. Birthdays, graduations, hopefully baptisms, first communions, confirmations, wedding, all the back and forth, the shared custody. You are now connected permanently with this woman. Literally in a person, that baby. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. He's like, I'm not ready mentally, financially, physically, any capacity to have a child. Why can't we just say this? Stop having sex.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
Are you an animal? You can't control yourself? You're hooking up with what he says, a girl that he has no feelings for?
Now
Janet
he's
Smith, crying, right? Like he's a victim?
Yeah, I know. You know Janet Smith, right? The Catholic scholar, whatever. I was listening to her a while ago. It was so funny because she's all about humanae vitae and, natural like not, I don't mean natural family plan like NFP, but like the natural family and not using contraception and so forth. And she was telling a story once where this young lady she worked with in whatever organization she was in, she was just like, "Oh, I'm pregnant. I don't know how that happened." And she's like, "Well, it wasn't from the toilet seat." You know, right. You made a choice and that's, so I mean, people have choices and the choices have consequences.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know, this guy, whoever you are, guy out here, become Catholic, spend some serious time with this girl that you have impregnated, work out a plan that I hope would somehow lead to a marriage. And then provide your son or your daughter with an excellent life.
Yeah.
Because it's not all about you. That's one of the amazing things about being married and then having kids is your life is not about you. It's not about what TV show you want to watch, what you want to do on Saturday morning, what you want to do on a Friday night, what you want to do this summer. It's not about you ever again.
Yep. Exactly.
It's Christocentric. It's Christological. And you have to submit to that. You have to accept that. Otherwise, you'll be miserable. Suffering is coming regardless. You might as well unite your suffering to the shape of the cross and find meaning and joy from it.
Yeah.
So, all right, one more thing I wanted to go over with you, and that is, I tweeted this yesterday. I don't know if you saw it. All right. In the last year, I've noticed more and more women have croaky voices. Sounds like a frog. Not necessarily a deep voice, but a ragged voice. Am I the only one? So I was wondering if this is maybe, I don't know if this is going on in Canada. I was thinking maybe this is from a certain medical treatment that people received over the last couple of years, meaning like for a virus or something. Or maybe this has to do with vaping or smoking. But I've heard women who smoke, they kind of have, like older women that have smoked for like 20 years, they kind of have that, it's kind of a more deep, raspy voice, like a Bruce Springsteen voice. But this is a croaky, it's like like a laryngitis. Have you noticed this, Kennedy? Or I thought maybe I was crazy, but everyone commented on it and like, absolutely, yes.
I haven't noticed, but the first thing that comes to mind, if this is a trend, and I don't really get out much, like, I'm in the thick of it with like 6 kids under 8 years old, and I work from home. So I'm not talking to a lot of people that aren't at church or my children, basically. And so maybe it is. But, I mean, birth control has been ubiquitous for most women since the age of about 14 for about 40 years.
Okay.
So, I mean, that messes with your hormones. I mean, even, it's funny, even the like secular people who aren't religious, they're all getting off birth control and they're adopting, well, they're either getting married or they're just, or doing some sort of NFP or something like that, for non-religious reasons, but just for health reasons. And, I think that, I mean, if the voice change, that's usually hormonal. So maybe that has something to do with it.
Yep. Yeah, birth control, vaping. But then, as I read people commenting on my comment, they said it is women doing this on purpose, that it is stylish to have a ragged, worn out voice. That was the consensus. Kennedy, I mean, you're a heterosexual male. Do you find the ragged voice, is that attractive? How is this a thing?
I don't know. I love how when I call my wife and she answers the phone, I say, "You still sound like you're 18." You know,
Yeah.
like she still sounds like the girl I married.
Yeah, same with my wife. She sounds like, yeah, it's a small voice.
I have like flashbacks, like when we were doing distance when we were at university, and like I call her, and as she picks up the phone, I'm like, "Oh my goodness, it's like I'm calling you, 15 years ago."
Yeah. Yeah, when people call our house, they're like, "Is your mom or dad home?" To my wife. Like at the drive-through, like, "Are you a child or an adult?" Okay, so someone sent this video, and there is some profanity in it, so I'm gonna have to try to edit that. But it's called the vocal fry, and I didn't know this was a thing. Let me see if I can put it. Yeah, here it is. So let me know if you can hear it. Hopefully you guys can hear it. All right, the volume is on. Okay.
Can't hear anything.
You don't hear it?
No.
Man, Ecamm has been playing me out lately. Has it been playing you out? I cannot get on either computer the innate sound on some of these videos.
I don't know. I might switch to StreamYard.
You used to use StreamYard.
It's fine. Ecamm is nice because you can customize, but you realize after a while, customizing might not be worth it when you're always dealing with tech problems.
Exactly. The other problem with Ecamm is every time I update it, something breaks.
Yeah. Now, Taylor, I saw.
Yeah, there was a super chat. Let me get that back in here. So yeah, this is. Let me get this one out. Okay, so can Kennedy explain why he believes women should not read about Marian apparitions, even though most Marian visionaries are female? You are so freaking sexist, Kennedy.
Well, thank you.
You ogre.
Well, actually, I don't think I said that, but I was talking on one show. There's this book called Counsels of Perfection for Christian Mothers, and it's a beautiful book written by a priest under the reign of Pius X. And it's honestly the most wonderful book for mothers. My wife read it, and in that book, he talks about how spiritual directors would advise mothers to stay away from reading too much private prophecy, not about apparitions like in a historical sense, only because it's so imaginative, and because there's so many apocalyptic themes that deserve an interpretive key by someone with a sound spiritual life, that with sort of the ups and downs of motherhood and the emotionalism, it would be just difficult. And it could be something that's a distraction and causes anxiety. Basically, that was the advice of this priest. And I just thought it was good advice for anyone, to be honest. I mean, I love Fatima, I love all these things, but it can be a lot.
So I just want to clarify for the audience and for myself. Are you saying women, or this author, women should not read about Marian apparitions or read messages from apparitions? I think there's a distinction there. And then also we got to throw into the mix here approved versus unapproved.
Yeah.
Because there are entire women's groups that meet at parishes around the world, and all they do is did you see what Our Lady said this last week about XYZ, and they discuss it. It's like a Protestant Bible study, but it's here's what's the Virgin Mary saying in the last 48 hours.
Yeah. Apparitions from historical perspective is great. Go read about Guadalupe. It's an amazing story. Go read about,
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. Is it okay for the ladies to get a book on Our Lady Guadalupe and read it? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. It's okay for anybody. It sounds great. I mean, it's they're approved for the Universal Church, and they're awesome. That being said, this constant looking for new messages, most people haven't even read the Bible.
Yeah.
Most people have not read the Bible. Most traditional Catholics have not read the Bible cover to cover. So that being said, it's
have.
Yes, you have. I followed your plan and read it in 2019, actually, the whole thing.
Good. I'm reading it again right now. Every year I try to read the Bible from, awesome, as we used to say as Protestants, from the table of contents to maps. Because the first page of the table of contents, the last page are the maps. Paul's missionary journeys and all that. Yeah. By the way, more homework for the audience here. Every single one of you should read the Bible. I go all over the world, Kennedy, and the thing I hear from people, they walk up to me in airports or churches, whatever, and they're like, hey, I'm on the team. I pray the rosary every day. I hear that all the time, right? Love that. I want to start hearing people say, I just finished reading the whole Bible, Genesis to maps.
Yeah. Yeah, it's read the Bible. And the apparition stuff, it's just it's a lot of landmines in there. Or sorry, revelation, not apparition, revelation things. They're different things. Apparitions are approved, like Fatima apparitions, Guadalupe. These things have been approved as historical events that are supernatural in character. And then there are messages that the Virgin Mary gives as part of those that are approved as part of that really painstaking and extensive process, which makes it verifiable. But the writings of mystics, just because something is published with permission of a bishop or something like that, does not mean that everything in the visions of the mystic constitute supernatural revelation. That's not what that means, and that's a big distinction. Even at our third order meeting a few weeks ago, Father was telling us how even the City of God by Maria of Agreda, who's obviously very saintly in so many ways, the popes actually wanted them not to continue publishing that book because there were certain aspects in it that seemed confusing about certain theological questions. But it continued in the Spanish Empire with a special permission, which is why it's so big in the States. Right. But it was forbidden to be published.
I love that book, by the way. I keep it on my
there's a lot of amazing stuff in there. But the reason is just because, okay, if somebody picks this up and they don't understand this sort of very nuanced theological thing, and she's using this sort of imagistic language, there can be ambiguities and problems for someone who's not well formed. That's really the point of the advice from this priest.
Right. Now, Kennedy, you're the expert on Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, but I remember reading in one of Lefebvre's books that Lefebvre told the priest and the laity associated with the Society of St. Pius X that they should focus more. I might have this a little bit off. I can't remember if he said the New Testament or the Gospels, and less on Maria Agreda and Catherine Emmerich. Have you ever seen this in Lefebvre? And did I get that right?
Yeah, he said that for sure.
Yeah.
Which
is, I would agree. Even though I'm not as big a fan as Anne Catherine Emmerich, there's some things in there, and I'm like, what? This seems kind of weird. Not sure if this is legit. Whereas when I read Maria Agreda, I'm like, oh, this is pretty based. I like it. But I would be the first one to line up with Lefebvre and say, read all four Gospels at least 10 times before you get down in some of this mystical literature.
Yeah, and even the Maria of Agreda one, the dispute arose around because these obviously they're presented as if they're from God, so the perception is that this must be like divinely revealed, right? And there was one of her statements that seemed to take a SCOTUS position on why Christ was incarnated.
There's Scotism throughout the whole book. As I'm reading it, I'm like, this is so Scotist and anti-Thomist.
That's right.
Yeah, 100%.
So that's why they said, well, Thomas is a universal doctor. If people aren't understanding Thomism versus Scotism, then there's but you understand this, so this is no danger for you. You're looking at it for, it helps you pray and all these kinds of things, right? Lots of literature like that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, for example, there was debates between the Thomists and the Scotists, the Franciscans, about what happened to the blood between the death and resurrection. Maria Agreda obviously takes the Franciscan Scotist take. Clearly, even though the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception wasn't declared yet, she's clearly teaching the Immaculate Conception. Has some interesting things about Joachim and Anne, but I generally find it beautiful, and there are reflections in there that are not dogmatic, they're not anti-biblical, and whether they are supernatural or just from a very pious nun in her Lectio Divina of biblical passages, I find much of it is beautiful. And pious. So we're talking about Maria of Agreda's Mystical City of God. It's a 4-volume set. And she has quite a bit of devotion here in Texas because she used to bilocate to Texas.
Yeah, yeah.
Allegedly. She would bilocate to Texas, and she would speak with the Native Americans and catechize them. And when the priest would come, for example, they would already know the Our Father, they would already know the Apostles' Creed. The women would say, "We want our infants baptized." So they already had a catechetical formation, and the priest would say, "How do you know all this?" And they would say, "The woman in the blue mantle taught it to us." So they thought it was the Blessed Virgin Mary, and they showed Blessed Virgin Mary. Like, no, that's not the woman who taught it to us. And they finally figured out that it was this nun in Spain. And she wore a blue mantle. And in Texas, our state flower is the bluebonnet, named after Maria Agreda, because after she would appear, bluebonnets would emerge. Texas Catholic history.
That's pretty cool.
All right. So I've been seeing, well, when the story came out in Canada, it was like Catholics, Holocaust, killing people, mass burials. We need apologies from the Pope, the church, just so much outrage, people leaving the Catholic Church. And then lately I've noticed, not on the front page, but on page 10, it's like, well, maybe this isn't legit. Maybe the media made this up. So you're a Canadian. Give us the background on the burial debate, and then what the latest news is with regard to the Catholic Church and so-called, all these injustices against the natives.
Sure. So I'll give a little background for the whole context. There was this thing called the residential school system, which is a fancy way of saying boarding school system. The word residential means to board there. It's the same thing. And it was enacted in 1876. Canada was made a dominion in 1867. And it was the result of the fact that education became compulsory in Canada, as it had in every country. So you have to go to school or be educated somehow. There were exceptions to the rule for if you had a very agrarian lifestyle, you needed the kids to stay on the farm and things, no problem. Not everyone actually was forced to go. It was just that was the general principle. So the tricky part is that with the reserve system, natives are wards of the state, technically speaking. So well, they were, at least. I think they still are. I might be wrong on that, but anyway, it's a tricky. That's the tricky part of the history. That whatever, we can debate colonization, all those sorts of things other time. But so there was this initiative by the government to provide opportunities for education for Native children if they didn't already have access to schools. And so it's a myth that all the students had to go to these schools. They estimate that maximum 150,000 Native students went through these schools K to 12, at least at some point in their life, over a period of about 120 years, which is just over 1,000 a year for an entire country, which is very few. When you think about, there was about 100 schools open at a time, like the classes were not very big, maybe 10 kids per grade kind of thing. And the schools were in many cases run by the Catholic Church. They were either existing schools that had been then they began to receive government funding for infrastructure, but they were already in existence. Or in some cases, Native bands and chiefs would say, "We don't have a school. Would you please have one built for us?" And the church would say, "No problem," and they'd staff it. And they'd be Catholic schools with essentially government funding. The same was true. About 46% of the schools were Catholic, about 35% were Anglican, and the rest were sort of non-denominational Protestant or Presbyterian, something like that. And some of them were just government schools where they were definitely Christian, but they weren't associated with the church. And some of them were day schools, some of them were trade schools, and some of them were boarding schools. In 2021, and Canada has a problem with Marxism like everywhere, and we don't have something the Marxists can point to, like slavery, etc., as our thing to make all the white people seem really bad. Right. I understand the institution of slavery, the Confederacy. I understand it's way more complicated than people make it out to be. Nonetheless, that's very easy for the Marxists to say, "Look at you bad, white people." Right. We don't really have that. We don't have that. It's just we didn't have a history of it, so we have this native question. And so the Marxists have really taken and run with it. And in the Summer of Love in 2020, when America was having all the fun with all your BLM riots and things, mostly peaceful, sometimes fiery, the Canadian Marxists were like, "Hey, man, they're having all the fun. We should be having a movement for our minorities." So in 2021, there was this report that came out of a researcher, and I don't even think it was this researcher's fault. Like, I don't even think she intended this at all. She was just a master's student who was native, who was doing ground penetrating radar research in Kamloops, BC, where this 215 unmarked graves claim came from, the first one, which, yeah, Kamloops is like a city, and the school is like beside the city. There's a documentary on this from the CBC called The Eyes of Children or something like that, showing how wonderful the school was 50, 60 years ago. Anyway, like, it's literally like it shows the kids in town. The school is like right there beside the town. So it's not even like the middle of nowhere. It's just owned by the reserve now. And she found aberrations in the soil, and then that doesn't mean anything. And then it got picked up as mass grave. So this was the COVID era when everything was insane. People were all upset. They wanted something to be upset about. They wanted a reason to have a stupid avatar on social media. So Justin Trudeau decides to visit this mass grave, and there's all these landscaping flags that have been put on the ground to where these supposed bodies were, and he kneels beside it with a teddy bear in hand, because he's respecting the poor murdered Native child. Here's a problem. Recently, and this was known before, but recently the government itself finally finished its own inquiry of excavation for this Kamloops property. And it turns out there's no bodies, because there were no bodies, because it didn't happen, because it's a lie. But the problem gets worse, because people don't know anything about history. People don't know anything about history. Most people know literally nothing. So they have no idea what a residential school was. A residential school was a school like any other school that's ever existed. And it was for Native students to go to if they didn't have one they could already go to. And the government did not forcibly take the children, except for in exceptional cases, which they still do today. In certain cases today, if the parents are degenerates, you will have your kids taken away, and they'll be put in a home, and they'll go to a school. That still happens today. That was happening back then.
Right.
And these schools had a parish, they had a cemetery, and they had a school, cemetery, and a parish. You go around all places in North America where Catholics settled, you find where the roads meet at the crossroads. You got a school on one side, you got a church on the other side, you got a cemetery out back. That's how all of them operate. These places happen to be on land that was then subsumed by the reserve system, and the church gave the land over. So in 1969, this took place officially. So these cemeteries were then under the care of the Native Reserve. The problem is, Native Reserves are largely run by crooks. It's the same in North America in all places. It's the people that, it's casinos and drugs and all this kind of stuff, tax evasion. That's a story as old as time. Race hustlers, it exists. And so they didn't take care of the cemeteries. So there's no more crosses, because this crosses disintegrated because they're made of wood or were vandalized, and there were no more markings on the graves. So then it turned into, well, it's not mass graves, it's unmarked graves. Those darn Catholics, they buried them and didn't even put a tombstone. But here's the problem. There was a national inquiry that took about 10 years, and it was released about 8 years ago. And it's literally a thorough documentation of every single thing that ever happened at any one of these schools. And volume 4 of this report is available on the Canadian Archives online, as are the provincial ones, and as are the parish ones, because the parishes kept the records until exclusively to about 1925, and then they gave them over to the government. They know where everyone was buried, and buried in these cemeteries are children, old people, white people, priests, and bishops and nuns, because it was the parish cemetery. So in these cases where they said, well, so Kamloops is literally nothing. It's not even a gravesite. In other places, like in Saskatchewan and other places where there's schools, it was, well, they're unmarked. No, they were not unmarked. And then they go and ask the parishes for their archives, and here's the burial plot plan, and we know everyone's name there. You just didn't keep up the gravestones and the grave markers. None of this matters, because it was like COVID. It was a lie that was so big. It was a lie that was so huge. It was constant information. People got whipped up into a frenzy, and all of a sudden, I think it was like 25 Catholic churches were either burned down or severely damaged, and a number of
this
churches.
This report here from LifeSite says over 100 churches have been burned or vandalized since the Trudeau government and mainstream media promulgated, without any physical evidence, the narrative that mass unmarked graves, etc. So,
yeah, and And that's exactly like some were burned to the ground. That includes everything like, spray paint, like you
Right.
stupid Catholics, right? So I mean, it's kind of like casualty in war. It means everything from being shot in the shoulder to being blown to bits, right?
Yeah.
So so, but here's the problem: Catholics are so afraid of
Hmm.
the secular narrative everywhere. They're so afraid that when this came out, the first reaction, even from conservative and traditional Catholics, mostly, not all, but mostly, was, well, there has to be another explanation for this. And the explanation wasn't the Marxists are lying, because they always lie.
Right.
The
Right.
explanation was, well, there was probably like a flu epidemic and it was so bad, or there was tuberculosis. And it's like, actually, if you look in the records, every single child who ever came through one of these schools was recorded. They had to keep, by law, medical records of even the dosage of medication they gave the kids. The funny thing is, the Canadian government does a lot of things wrong. When you study the history of how these schools were run, it's one of the most efficient, professional, and conscientious things the government's ever done. Every time a child died, and by the way, children used to die a lot, and the rate of children dying at these schools was lower than the rate of the children dying on the reserves. Reason is because these schools had things like running water, and on staff they had nuns who were nurses, and they had an infirmary and a physician attendant. And they were not in remote communities, so if they had to have emergency surgery, like for appendicitis, they would bring them into the town, which they were always built near for very practical reasons. So the parents would willingly send their kids to these schools. And we should also say, natives are just human beings, and many of them were devout Catholics, and they wanted their kids to have a Catholic education because everyone wanted their kids to have a Catholic education.
Right.
So not only did they have 3 square meals a day, running water, medical care, a world-class education, by the way, because everyone knows a good Catholic education is the best, especially in the past. And they would have had no education on the reserve, where they had a very moribund existence in many cases. So, and it was all free. They didn't have to pay anything. And so so you hear stories, for example, like they'll say, well, these bad natives. I should finish my train of thought. When a kid would die, have to have an inquiry of the principal, the physician attendant, and the government official, who would then do an intense investigation into the cause of death to see if there was any malpractice. And they had to record that for every single one. So even in the cases where and there's not a single instance in the entire archive, there's not a single instance of any homicide whatsoever. It's tuberculosis, it's measles, it's all the stuff people died from, 50, 80, 100 years ago. That's just what life was like. But in the schools, their rate of death from tuberculosis was lower than the general population for non-natives in the community for tuberculosis, because they lived with nurses and they lived in a place with an infirmary.
So, I mean, this is totally a lie. Now, I remember bishops, and did the Pope ask for forgiveness? I mean, wasn't there some official mea culpa from the church on this that was exploited as well?
Yeah, when Pope Francis came in 2022, Bishop Wander, who just died, rest in peace. He was he actually kind of sort of joined the SSPX in retirement. He went there on a mission from the Ecclesia Dei. He came out with videos. He was from Chur, the bishop of the Diocese of Chur. I think it's in Switzerland. He's German speaking. I can't remember if he's Swiss or Austrian.
Okay.
But he just died from a sickness, and he released a series of videos in German, which are great with subtitles, where he studied the works of Archbishop Lefebvre and believes he's a saint. And he asked for the church. He asked Pope Francis to apologize for the injustice done to the SSPX, because he said, you can apologize for phantom graves. You should apologize for something that actually happened.
Wow.
So yes, Pope Francis did, and that was the context. So,
and has Francis come out and said, "Oh, I apologized for fake unmarked graved. Now I need to correct my apology. That was for a fake crime"?
No.
Or are we just sort of waving our hand, Jedi mind trick? This never happened. Move on.
They'll never retract. The church has just become ashamed of its history. Even under John Paul II and Pope Benedict, there were various apologies for them in some ways for these schools. These schools were amazing. They were amazing. Yeah. They were unbelievable. I talked to a guy. An acquaintance of mine runs a think tank, and he had the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper was a conservative. He was pretty good compared to Trudeau, especially. And there's, it's kind of like the Heritage, whatever it's called, or like, these various think tanks you have in the States that kind of have the ear of the politicians. This major one in Canada, I talked to the guy who runs it, and he did a deep dive into the residential school thing. This guy isn't even Catholic. He's like some Protestant background. And he said to me on the phone, he said, Kennedy, those nuns and priests, he said they were saints. They were heroes, what they did to kids. Like these,
Yeah, but
of course
even
they
if,
were.
let's just say they weren't. All right, let's just say they were mediocre.
Right.
This whole thing is fake. It's a media stunt by Canadian politicians to escalate tension against Catholics and to erode Catholic authority and Catholic voice in Canadian culture. That's what it's all about. Like, I'm an American. Like, you're giving all the stats about how great the schools are. That's awesome, right? But even if they were mid, this whole thing is an abuse of political power and media.
Yeah, it's just it's so many lies. Like it's a lie on top of a lie on top of a lie. Even and yes, you're right. Even if they were bad, but the thing that makes it so much worse is they weren't only not bad, they were exceptional.
Yeah.
Like you can read the writings of these nuns. I mean, Taylor, if you met some like 20-year-old kid tomorrow who was a Protestant and he said, I'm going to go to some part in Africa as a missionary because I want to help kids build schools and build wells. Right. You'd be like, you know what? I wish you wouldn't make them Protestants, but you're like a really, really good guy. Like you're a really good guy if you want to do something like everyone knows that someone who says, I'm going to spend my life going to the third world, the developing world, whatever, and I'm going to devote my life to caring for children, many of them orphans. Those are the best people that exist, just objectively speaking. So that's the kind of people that did this. These nuns were coming from Quebec or Belgium or France in many cases, and they were coming to Canada in the 1800s to go to Alberta. Are you kidding me? It's like minus 55. Your habit's going to break if it's wet when you walk outside because it's going to snap in half. It happens. And you're going to do what? You're going to go to the northern Alberta to have a school with kids who come in from reserves with no sanitation on the reserves. So they come in and you have to delouse 100 kids every September and cut their hair, and you get lice, and you still have to wear your habit top of your lice so you can't even scratch it while you're whatever. They did that because they loved the children. So not only was it not bad, they were saints, and everyone should be appreciative of what they did. Yeah.
This is, we got to have you back on, Kennedy. We got to talk about evolution, theistic evolution, how all the normie Catholics are like, I'm so cool. I'm a cool Catholic because I believe in evolution and I talk about theology of the body every day and how cool sex is for Catholics. Like, this is the absolute state of cringe normie Catholicism, of trying to convince the world that we too are cool because we believe in evolution and we can talk about sexual intercourse or whatever. So we're going to have you back. I also want to talk to you. I had on my list here to talk to you about all your research on Pentecostalism and charismatic renewal inside and outside the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And you hit me with some news about the foundation and the beginnings of the charismatic movement, which are super sketchy. So we'll have you back on and we'll talk about charismatics, evolution, and why we shouldn't be selling out on our Apologetics Catholic Answers World Tour, trying to convince everyone that theistic evolution is groovy and cool.
Yeah.
So everybody follow Kennedy at Kennedy Report on YouTube. Like this video, thumbs up it right now. We only have 703 likes. This is insane. Y'all should be liking this video. Subscribe here at the Dr. Taylor Marshall Podcast. You can support my work at Patreon.com/Dr. Taylor Marshall. You can also go over to Kennedy's YouTube channel, support there. Follow us on Twitter, X, Instagram, YouTube, all that. And any closing remarks?
Yes, I did a video yesterday called Charismania, the heresy behind the charismatic renewal. You can find that. I'm going to release more, and there'll be more at my Substack for premium members, by the way, meretradition.substack.com. and there's a lot of stuff on there. I talk about controversial things that might get me kicked off YouTube, so it's a lot of fun. And so check that out.
Awesome. Great. Well, Kennedy Hall, thanks for being on, and thanks for all the work you do. I really enjoy your channel and appreciate your time. All right, everybody.
No
thanks for watching. Remember, our Lord Jesus Christ is you're the light of the world and the salt of the earth. So go out there and be salty. God bless. Godspeed. Pray the rosary every day, or you're not on the team. Get on that team. God bless.